Yeah, there's a, like I'd mentioned, this is my 15th year. So what does that mean? 15 years ago, after playing 20 straight seasons of rugby with 5 league championships, 2 national championships, um, I moved my, that's what I was doing. I moved my business to Hayward. And that's where I grew up. That was my high school was. Uh, Bought a commercial building and decided to focus more on my business at a training center, brand new building, really nice. And as I was going out there, one of my former high school football teammates and very good friend asked me if he was coaching at the time, and he asked me if I would want to come by and help out. And my first reaction is, no, I'm not a coach. That's one thing I'm not as a coach. I don't enjoy yelling at kids. Some people do, some people don't, but it's just not my thing, right? Plus, you find I just finished playing, right, at a high level. So those are always not the best coaches. When you're too close to any game, I think you need a couple of years to calm down a little bit from a transitioning directly from a on the field player to an actual coach, because it's a different set of skills.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you bring that up, because I was just talking to somebody about leadership the other day, and it's just like, well, good individual contributors are not by default good leaders of people, and quite often the most talented of individual contributors don't want to be leaders. They're happy making their money, just doing their thing. They don't want the responsibility of someone else's success or failure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the timing of that.
Yeah. So I went out to oh, that's right. He said, no interested. I said, no interested in being an on-field coach. He says, how about doing the weight training? I said, yeah, I'll do that. I don't mind doing that. My office is only 10 minutes from the high school. I had a 30-minute drive home. So I'll stop there on the way home, and I'll do some weight training. So I started off doing the weight training with the freshman players. And that's 14-year-olds, right? 15-year-olds, right? And so I started to enjoy it. What I started to realize is kids are kids. Doesn't matter, what year it is. It doesn't matter what color their hair is. It doesn't matter. It's the same. A kid is a kid, right? Mm-hmm. And I also had kids, kind of around that same age, a little bit younger at that time. Anyway, but I also started to realize, man, this facility hasn't been touched in 2 decades since I was there. I mean, it's exactly the same. It was the same weights. It was pretty sad. To me, it was, because driving from where I was living, where I was raising my children, it was the 1% to the 99%. And then the more I kept doing this, the more I started liking the kid, and the more I became aware of it. Everything was different, right? Mm-hmm. But then in some ways, nothing has changed. And so the head coach and I became pretty good friends. And I said, what do you need? He says, you know what we really need? We need a new weight room. And I said, I think I'm able to help you out with that. So he goes, I go, what's your challenge? The challenge is, of course, we don't have the money, because I'm coaching football, and that's what football coaches do. But you also have the administration, right? You have a principal, you have athletic director, you have a superintendent. There's a lot of layers to do something like this. Mm-hmm. And as I said, but first of all, we need to raise some money. So I said, okay, how much do we think? It's probably about $100,000 is what it would cost to do this weight room, right? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just raising the money. It was also being able to work with the administration to find the facility and do all that. It's a big project, right? Mm-hmm. So at the time, I had, just to kind of give you a timestamp on this. At that time, one of my best friends actually had just become the manager for the Seattle Mariners. He may have been with the Oakland A's as the bench coach, but that year he got moved up to the manager for the Seattle Mariners. My other friend was at that time with he was the head coach for Jacksonville Jaguars. Mm-hmm. Eddie House just had won his championship with who was he playing for at that time? The Boston. Anyway, he was another Hayward High alumni. Mm. And Bill Walsh also, did he die, or he died a few months later? Because I'll get to that point too. So those are all alumni from my high school, right? Uh-huh. And of course, I don't have Bill Walsh's cell phone number, but I had Jack's and Don's cell phone number. because they're good friends, right? And I know their families very well. We all grew up together.
Yeah.
So I called them and said, hey, what do you think about doing a golf tournament? So we did this golf tournament, and it was a huge success. Not only was it a huge success because I remember we had a committee and they said, well, where do you want to do it? And they said, well, we could get, the best country club, which we could, because a couple of guys on the committee were members of really, really nice country clubs, especially out here in Danville and Diablo. And I said, no, we're going to do it in Hayward. We're going to keep this real. We're going to keep it at the public course right there in Hayward. No, we can't do that. Nobody's going to come. It's embarrassing. No. I said, no, I know. We're going to do it there. And then everybody was disagreeing with me. And Jack said, no, he's right. Let's do it. So I got my, it was probably my call, but Jack supported me. So it helped a lot, obviously. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was concerned. You can't blame him because, he was going to make some calls, and he did. Boy, did he. We had that first golf tournament. We had Dave Casper, of course, Oakland Raider Hall of Famer. We had, the defensive coordinator from the Raiders, from the 49ers, because Raiders and 49ers were there at that time. So, it was, Maurice Drew-Jones was there. It just went on and on. I mean, it was, and everybody had a blast. Yeah. And since it was a public course, we got to take it all over. We had the all to ourselves. Jack's good friend owned Outback Steakhouse. He donated all the food. John Madden gave us a bunch of stuff. It was just an all-in thing. It was a lot of fun, right?
That sounds awesome.
It was awesome, yeah. So that raised the $100,000. But I worked with this principal. I was able to get this former gymnastics room, huge facility, and that was the weight room. So we did that year one. Year two, we did what did we do? Yeah, we did the locker room. So we redid the locker room, and then I started to realize, we did a couple more golf tournaments and some other events. But what I think really changed was there was a lot of celebrity. There was a lot of work putting into that. But I think I had a change of heart because I realized that it was a lot of fun, but it wasn't really about that. It was really more about even hearing Jack and Don, everybody talk about the experience that we had in high school and how that has such an impact the rest of your life, right? Those friendships, but also the structure of an activity. Now, of course, because it was football, we can relate to that, but it could be any activity. It could be the band, it could be theater, it could be anything. And then it became personal to me because I realized if it hadn't been for playing 3 years of varsity football, I played varsity as a sophomore, and that's how I know Jack and Don. They were 2 years older than I was. But had that not happened, my life would have been very different. I struggled a lot in school, and then I found out later that over close to a third of all ninth graders that start high school in this area, Hayward, Oakland area, don't graduate. There is close to a third. There's over a 30% dropout rate and you know what happens if somebody doesn't graduate from high school, doesn't have their incarceration goes up to about 80-90%, right?
I think it's Jordan Peterson that talks about graduating high school, not having a kid until you're married, and having a job. There's three. Those are the three things that will make you successful. You miss on one of those, and the numbers just cascade down.
Yeah.
So yeah, dude, what I'm hearing, and just for your from your perspective, is you started by a guy going, "Hey, Jim, you want to help coach?" And this has turned into a cause. This has turned into a cause that's been really, really successful.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing or reflecting on that, because I'll take it to the kind of this where it is now. But yeah, it also started to become personal because, I realized that in this part of the Bay Area, you either do really, really well, like some of us had done, or you don't. And all of us, because it was just a mixed area, mixed of different Black, brown, all these different nationalities. Is very much the Bay Area, but also you're exposed to a lot of gangs. Like, for example, I had two cousins that spent most of their life in prison. That I remember when I was growing up, that was an option, right? I could have went and I was hanging out with them when I was younger, and they were my older cousins by a year. Of course, you're you're attracted to that, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
seeking leadership, especially at that young age of 14 years old, 15,
Mm-hmm.
16, 17. You're looking for, well, we use the word leadership. It's actually what you're looking for, structure and belonging. And
Yeah.
you're going to get that, whether it's going to be through a gang or whether it's going to be through prison, which is a lot of structure, or whether
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be through some kind of a sport or some kind of
Yep.
belonging.
Yep.
So, so
Yep.
I realized it became personal that it hadn't been for that, it would have turned out very differently. And then, but I think the lowest, again, reflecting back, was that with so I went on to try to go to play football. That wasn't going to happen for a number of reasons, mostly genetics. Uh, but as a result, I was trying to go to college. My dad made it clear you could stay in the house as long as you were enrolled in college. But I dropped out to become a cabinet maker because I went through a windshield. I got in a car accident, and that pretty much ended my ability to play football. And school was hard enough, but as a result, I had to go get my own place, basically, right? That was the deal. And but I was still trying to go to school at night just so I would get to have a place to stay. And I went to junior college, and one of the English teacher asked me to stay after class. She had a couple of words with me, and she told me, "Hey Jim, I got kind of bad news for you. We got the test back, and I don't know if anybody told you this, but you have a secondary reading level. You're basically illiterate, and if you got to deal with this." She wasn't super warm, but she also wasn't being mean. She was just very matter of fact. Like, there's no
Mm-hmm.
reason for you to come back to class. And I'll never forget, because it was a Thursday night. I was making cabinets all day long, taking BART from San Francisco to Hayward. I was full of sawdust, and I was like, I was tired. It was 10 o'clock at night, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember walking back to my pickup truck at the time and sitting in the parking lot till about 2 o'clock in the morning. I just remember going, I am so fucked. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I going to do? Right.
Yeah.
And the hardest part about that, and as I share this with a lot of people, is that same year, Don was named the MVP of the College World Series at ASU.
Mm.
Jack was the MVP of the Rose Bowl that year. Exactly. So,
well, it's interesting. And I'll just jump in here for a second, because what an incredibly interesting story. And I'm hearing all these dots are connected, because what we're both in agreement with is at a certain young age, 13 to 17, in there somewhere, it's make or break it time for kids, right? The decisions that are made during those periods of time. And if people like you and me aren't around, and these kids don't have dads, those decisions, Denzel Washington talks about this all the time. And I just saw a video of Dwayne Wade accepting the Hall of Fame celebration. And he called his dad out of the audience and brought him up on the stage. And it was a really touching moment. And he was just talking about how his dad took him in the backyard and practiced like they were, colleagues, and how, it was just, and his dad was just, they just hugged, and it was all emotional. And one of the hashtags under the video was "Dads Matter," but
yeah, there's a couple things you touched on. A really important point out. And this is also back to being a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old. It's not just a relationship with their father. It's a relationship with the strong male role model.
That's right.
And often it's actually not the father. It could be a coach, could be a neighbor, could be a teacher, could be an uncle, grandfather, who knows? But I think it's unrealistic to believe that everybody, if they just had a perfect dad at home, then everything would just be fine. That's not realistic.
I agree. I think as you're talking, and I've told you this before, I think immaturity was probably just as much of a cause of me not playing in college as anything else. But I didn't have, not one of my coaches, not my basketball coach, not my baseball coach, reached out to any colleges on my behalf. They had no interest in doing that. They were very bad coaches. I played for very bad coaches in high school, and I was MVP of the baseball team. I was captain of the baseball team. I was an all-star, and I had a strong arm.
Again, that's the thing.
It's not an excuse, Jim, but it's really, reflecting back on it. It's like, what if one of those guys had made a few phone calls? What if? And it's like, so that's why I think the takeaway for me is how important it is, if you have the ability and the time and the capacity, to try and help people at that time of their life.
Yeah,
Call it
I
what you
think the
want.
what if again. I don't like to get in the X's and O's. I think that's one thing when I talk about the Hayward High football alumni 15 years. I never ever talk about the game. I never talk about how many being the MVP and or I just don't get the it's not about the game. It's not about the game at all. It's about what you learn from the game. And what I learned, and this really is what made the difference when I was sitting there. I was in tears. I mean, think about that. Somebody told you you're 19 years old that this was not good, right? And but I did have, luckily, I did have a very good mother and father and I was loved, and not everybody has that, right? So that
a lot of
makes
people don't have that.
A lot of people don't have that.
Yeah.
So, but I remember what I remember asking myself, what am I going to do? Like, what do you do? And I just this kind of voice in my head came back, and it started off with my first play. Man, it's not that far along, difference in years, right? So I remember I got moved up to varsity. I was like fourth string. Somehow I ended up becoming first string with Jack and Don. Those were the three linebackers, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't blame the coach. I mean, there was a lot of other good players on the team at that time. Mm-hmm. And he brought me up kind of on a chance, but as a result, I remember making my first play, and Jack came up behind me and said, "Oh no, it was in the locker room." That's right, it was the locker room. It was he's like he's an All-American. He's 6'4", 240 pounds, all-American in 3 sports and academic. I mean, this guy is. I think everybody's like supposed to be like that, right? I don't realize at the time, that's not normal.
Yeah. Another lesson. Lesson.
Yeah. And he says, nobody runs on Hayward, and it was just okay. I guess that's how we do it, right? And the whistle blows, first play came, bam, I make the play. Make the cabin. That's it. That's what I'm talking about. And so I just had this mentality that nobody runs on Hayward. This mentality comes from growing up in that environment. And then Don was, was unbelievable. Kind of their different styles, but clearly a world-class guy. And that's why he became. And I learned a lot from him too. There was kind of like 2 different styles, right? And a baseball player, even though he played football, and a football player mentality. But anyway, as a result, that's really what I said. I'm not going to let this break me. I'm not going to let this define me. And it's not what happens to you in life. It's how you respond to what happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you learn at that time. And so what I did is I obviously didn't continue in that class, but I went to the other junior college across town. It was another 2 BART stations away. And I signed up for business classes and just listened. And then I started getting tapes of how to speak, because speak, let's just say, not without slang. So I self-educated myself, basically just got 8 cassette tapes and listening to books on tapes and things like that to basically teach myself of this. And then I'd learn my business classes, and that I would just I'd get F's, but I wouldn't even turn the paperwork in. I would just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
And it was like $10 a credit. It was very inexpensive. It was junior college, right?
Yeah.
I did that for like 2.5 years. I just sit there and I'd get those. I get the report card in the mail or whatever, and I just throw it away. I didn't care.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't I would do the work. I wouldn't even turn it in. I knew I was going to get an F on everything I did. And
it's talk about like, I'm not going to accept this circumstance as my destiny, right? That's we all have those moments too, and not everybody sits in their truck until 2:00 and figures it out and then decides to take action. A lot of people, that's the time to give up, and life gets hard. Harder.
So anyway, I'll finish the last part and we'll get on to the kind of the alumni group. So then anyway, the car accident that I got when I went through a windshield, it's 68 stitches in my eye, cut my, I should have lost my eye. I went through that. few years go by, that ends up, I get $10,000 basically. There was a drunk driver hit us straight on. I had no safety belt on because there was no safety belt law at that time. So I get 10 grand. I took the $10,000 that I got from the attorney's office and drove it to the escrow office and bought my first house at 21 for $100,000, 10% down, 10% interest, if you could believe that, huh? Talk about old times coming back, huh? And had a little cabinet shop in the back. So I'd made cabinets on the weekends. And then I moved from making cabinets to selling cabinets. And since I knew a lot of guys in the trades, obviously, because I grew up, and I sold a shitload of cabinets. I sold $1 million worth of cabinets. My first year, I was the salesman of the year, and I just kept selling and did real well in that. And eventually I put up my own agency. But during that time, I learned I had dyslexia, and dyslexia, it turns out that, you're not, I mean, you do a lot of talking, you're in sales at that time. You don't have to write a lot, right? But part of the dyslexic mind is that it sees things from all different angles differently than other people. So this weakness of dyslexia also has its strengths. And when I was installing cabinets, I realized, wow, this is a lot of work to clamp it and align it and do all these different things. So that was my first patent. I invented a clamping device that to this day installs millions of cabinets every day. It's a one of a kind, and it's been on the market for over 20 years. The patent expired a few years. I have a second generations of patents that are pending right now. But in addition to my royalties that I was receiving, I licensed that to at the time the largest clamp manufacturer in the U.S. and that did real well. But I made most of the money selling cabinets, B2B mostly, that kind of thing, and that was it. So as a result, I contribute all that to what I learned at those years, and those relationships I had with those coaches, and just learning how to compete, and then being around those guys. So then, I was going to last weekend when we started doing a lot of different events, and then I turned it more into a mentoring program. So I would take the seniors, I would call it, I'm going to prepare you for the last whistle and the last bell. And what that meant is the sophomores and juniors were pretty too young to really talk to, but the seniors, that's a different situation, because I remember when the last whistle blew, that was your last high school varsity game as a senior, your life changes a lot, especially in this country. Right. And when that last bell rings in November, your life's going to change a lot, because, in my opinion, you've been in a public education system, you've been prepared for socialism, but you're being released into capitalism. And if you don't have an education, then unless you go to military or something, there's really only a few options for you, right? You're going to go here. So fortunately, in my case, I found rugby, and that really helped a lot, because all that aggression and all that, the frustration, really the anger that I had, instead of going to jail, which that happened a few times too, for fighting and all those kind of things you get involved in, especially in that area at that time, right? Now it's diverted into this rugby thing, and it was a lot. It completely changed my life. Not to mention, by moving out of the trades into a professional job, I was able to get more girls, or let's say higher quality girls. and
nice byproduct.
Absolutely, at that time. So fortunately, I attracted somebody that was not just the opposite, right? She was a straight A student that went to Cal, and I barely graduated from high school, and so that worked out pretty well too.
You just do, if you open up your eyes and your heart, I guess you get to do over. You get do-overs like multiple different times during your life. And I think if you just pay attention to that and go, okay, well, this feels like a hardship right now, but I think it might be an opportunity.
Well, here's the other thing I learned. People ask, this is just recent, because some of these players have been somewhat mentoring for the last 15 years, were asking me questions after we were cleaning up. And I said, one of the reasons I started the alumni group was, one, because I knew the impact it could have, but I had no idea it would be as powerful as it has become. But the other reason was, since I didn't go to college, I never had a college experience. And then when I remember going to my son's That's right. My son was got ASU, and I remember walking down in the parents' weekend, whatever. And I look up on the wall, and there's there's Don in the in the his picture of him, because he was, I think he's in the Hall of Fame there or something. But and of course my wife had her alumni from Cal, and everybody had their alumni. So I didn't think about this, but I created my own alumni group because I didn't have a fraternity. I didn't have that experience, right?
That's interesting.
Isn't
That's
it?
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's it.
but
That was calling up from your subconscious, I would imagine.
yeah, but the message that is senior, I would have senior dinners at my office, and I'd talk to them, and then I'd get them all around the table, about 15 of them, and I'd say, hey, you got to give up your story. This is not about football. I'm getting you ready for the last whistle. I'm getting you ready for the last bell, and you're going to be released into this world, and you're going to be based on your value that you bring to the world. And it was really more about preparing them for life. Mm-hmm. During this football season that I could do this, especially that's something you learn. You feed any 15, 16 or 17-year-old food, and you're going to get straight to their heart. Right. But yeah, it was that message he's in talking about life and about adding value, about being a good human. And it was all based on this book that I read, The Season of Life. And it talks about this NFL player that his dad used to beat up his mom. He was an alcoholic, although he did all the things that people do. And he said, really, to change the world, we have to build men for others. And that book became a #1 bestseller. And he devoted his life. And you talked about faith. Now he's a Christian, so a lot of this is faith-based, but he's really saying to really change the world, we have to make these young men see the world differently. Because if they treat women better, their mothers, which is their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, their grandmothers, then everything changes. So, and I really believe that. And one of the chapters in the book, he's talking about how, the writer was speaking. It was a preseason game. It was the first football game of the season, and the players were doing the warm-ups. And one of the parents walked up to the head coach and said, "Hey, coach, what do you think of the team this year?" And the coach, looks at the players. He's looking around, and he looks down, and he looks up, and he says, "I'll tell you in 15 years."
Yeah, I like that story.
Yeah,
I like that.
And so the 15 years was last Saturday night. So those same kids that went to the first camp out that I did 15 years ago, of that class, the head coach was in my backyard 15 years ago. It was his junior year, I believe. There's 9 total alumni that have come back, not just from that class, 9 total. Yeah. And in addition to that, there's a P teacher that's the assistant coach, and then another P teacher, assistant coach. All 3 have their master's degree, and all of them came back, and now are employees of the Hayward Unified School District, and now are running this varsity, the entire football program. So that's what the 15-year was special. And we talked about some notable alumni, right? So the coach, he calls me on Friday and says, "Hey," he's obviously a little bit excited. He goes, "I think I got a special guest." And I've heard this before. I said, "Well, yeah, of course you can." He asked me if it was okay. And I said, "Yeah, no problem." It's, and he told me the name, and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I know he's an alumni. He's a good guy. I've met him before, but that's a big one. I wouldn't, my recommendation is don't tell anybody. Don't tell any parents. Don't tell any kids. If he shows up, he shows up." And yeah, 6 o'clock, we just about ready to serve dinner. And I was in the far back, and, obviously it was a super nice car. I don't know if it was a Ferrari or what it was. Yeah, it was Andre Ward, the world famous boxing. And so he comes over. Like I said, he's a good guy. The story gets bigger and bigger, because not only did he go up and say something, everybody was excited, right? Because there's a lot of all the coaches were there, their wives, few parents were still dropping their kids off, so they were there. But it was the right guy at the right time, and I think that's what you mentioned gratitude. I had a lot of gratitude, because something I had a vision of 15 years ago, but to see the new messengers so much better than I can do it. Like I know the base, what they learned, and that was resonating with them. And but when you have somebody that really can speak like them, that looks like them, you can really have an impact. And I've always said that the change has to come from within. And when I stopped doing the big events was because I never wanted, it became personal in that I never wanted to look like I was using these kids for my own good or own status, of doing these things. So I started doing this really over the last 10 years silently, not telling anybody, and of course a lot of money and time on the mentoring, but focusing more on getting the coaches right, working with that. Oh yeah, I forgot. And then in that time period, I did meet the superintendent. One year, Jack asked, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want you to meet the superintendent and also the board president," which all happened to be African American. The reason I mention that is because if it wasn't for Stan Dobbs and John Taylor, which actually were the guys that really got behind what we were doing, it would have been very different. We were able to get a $240 million bond measure passed, and we redid all 3 high schools in Hayward. There's 3 high schools in Hayward.
Wow.
And that, you talk about having an impact, but that was the politics, not just the raising the money. I helped Stan. That bond measure had failed several other times, and I said, "No, we're going to do it. I'm going to help out Stan. We're going to do it differently this year. It's football season because the election is November." I said, let's bring all, instead of just Hayward High, let's get all 3 high schools, Tennyson, Mount Eden. And then I got the head football coaches along with that's right, Jack, all came to my office, and I said, "Here's the deal. Your facilities are terrible. They haven't been touched since 1960. This is the vision, this bond measure. Superintendent's behind this project, but we've got to get this bond measure passed." So what we did is we enrolled all of the programs and put the kids in their football uniforms, and had them knock on doors a week before the election. Mm-hmm. And then of course we got on phones. It was very political, and it was the largest bond measure victory. They passed it with 80% approval, and that's what raised the $240 million that built the facilities. And these are first class facilities. Yeah. So it was the impact. It wasn't just changing. You had to change from the inside. But Stan Dobbs and the board president at the time, John Taylor, they recognized, and in fact, they came up with the Made in Hayward. It's not, if you go to the Hayward Unified School District, it says Made in Hayward. That was all part of that whole time period where, but yeah, John and Stan came to my house, and we had dinner in my backyard, and that's when we got behind them. And then about that same year, Jack becomes the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. And
that's a lot of lives being changed right there, man. That's a lot of lives being changed, and you won't see them all, but you can probably feel them all. That's great work, dude. I was watching this video you sent me that's private to us now. Hopefully we can do something with it, because it's a wonderful, wonderful speech. I think it was 16 minutes.
Tell me what your takeaways were from it, and then I'll share.
I wish I listened to it again right before we started talking, because I listened to so many things, motivational things and public speaking things, but the personal accountability was really the message. And anybody can do, you guys can do anything you want, if you show up. And it was all the stuff we talk about. But the thing I was going to say was, my angle was your angle, because you were filming it in your camera. So I was seeing what you were seeing. And because you were filming, I don't know how aware you were of what was going on around what you were filming, because when I film something, I'm not aware of what's on my left or right. But I was watching everything, and they were transfixed. There wasn't one guy.
I didn't recognize it. Yeah, you're right.
There wasn't one guy looking at anybody other than Andre for the whole time.
It was unbelievable. And how about the parents and the few parents who were given, was mostly coaches. Everybody was just first of all, when I say world class, I don't mean a world class athlete. I'm talking about a world class guy. Andre Ward clearly is a world class athlete. I didn't realize his accomplishments until later, actually. And he represented the U.S. twice. He has 2 gold medals in boxing. Yep. He's undefeated in a total of 3 weight classes.
Yeah.
He was nominated for the Boxing Hall of Fame and got through the first time.
Yeah.
That's so when I'm talking about a world-class athlete, that's one thing, right? But if you look at his background, it's so similar to what a lot of kids are going through in Hayward, right? His mother and father, his birth mother and father were not in his life. It was a mentor. It was his godfather that 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 took him in and got him into boxing. You know, all this is in Hayward, and he grew up in Oakland. It's just like me. I was born in Oakland, but Hayward is right next to it. So it's this combination. But he states what he did. This is also the sign of an intelligence. Is when somebody, when a matter of, he had a general idea what he's getting into, or he wouldn't commit to coming, right? But he was able to read the room very, very quickly, craft a message, and speak to that room. And that was, of course, those players. He talked about him a little bit about himself, but not too much. Talked about growing up in Hayward and that. But the two takeaways, there's many more than that, was how he talked about the front end grind, and you got to put the work in the front end grind, and then without putting the work in the front end on the grind, then you're never going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities on the back end when they come. So that to me was that. And then the other one that I will always obviously give him credit for, how he talked about, you play, he goes, it's okay, to play for your first name. That's he's talking to them as young men. You're building your own brand, but that's your first name. He says, but really what you want to do is you want to get to the point where you're playing with your last name. And that's that call to your mother, to your grandmother, to your father, whoever it is. You don't want to let those people down. So the way he was able to separate your first name as you're young, you got to look good. You want all these different things. Don't get too caught up in that, but really go the next level. You play for your last name. And
no, it was really good, man. My dad used to say to me when we would leave the house every time, remember who you are. And that was, you're an Aylward, and that means something. Yeah. And that's what he was saying is, make sure that your last name means something, and that something is all good.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's the other. I created a little process, because I take them to dinner, and then we would go. This is a few years ago. I still do the camp out every year this year, but when I had my office in Hayward, that I would do this 2 or 3 times a year. And then to do a last senior breakfast. But the message was pretty clear. Number one, be proud of who you are, and who you are is what you're talking about. Your last name. It's your nationality. It's your family heritage. Never ever apologize for anybody for who you are, right? And get comfortable with that. Be proud of where you're from. You're from Hayward, California. That was a stigma. Andre Ward even says it. They always hate on people from Hayward. That's just part of growing up. Even when I played 20 years of rugby, nobody liked Hayward. But we're very much the Oakland Raider, old school Oakland Raider mentality, right?
Yep.
And that's what it is. But be proud of who you are. Be proud of where you're from. And then I would say this: anything is possible in this country for those who want to work. But you got to show up. And you got to show up when it's cold. You got to show up when it's hot. You got to show up when you're hungry. You got to show up when you don't have a ride. It's hard to show up. And that's pretty much the only, on the camp out every year, 15 years, the message has always been the same. They sit down after dinner and I say, okay, here's, the players that have been there year before, they know the answer, but I said, you know what the number one rule is? This year, this is the 15th Hayward High football camp out. Welcome. And I say, there's one rule. Anybody know what it is? And it's funny because they won't give it up. And I said, you know what it is. The number one rule is there is no rules. This night is your night. There is not a single rule. And why is there no rules? Because you did something to be here. You did something. You showed up, and these coaches believed in you, and that's why you're a guest in our home. My wife and I allow you in our home for the night, and I just want to let you know we've never had a single incident in 15 years. You have no rules, but that comes with responsibility.
Yeah,
and I don't expect it to change. So it's not a lecture. It's not, it is letting them know that they did something to be part of something. Don't fuck it up.
Yeah, they earned it.
They earned it. They
Yep.
absolutely earned it. And
yeah, that's such a, you know, that's like this guy Bill Campbell, the coach in the $1 trillion
yeah,
coach book that I was telling you about earlier, which is interesting that I'm reading now. The timing of it all, um, you know, showing up was he coached where he played. I think it was Columbia or Cornell. It wasn't a big school. Not a lot of guys going pro from those schools, and he never had a. I don't think he ever had a good record because and he was focused more on creating good men instead of just good football players.
yeah,
So he would let walk-ons that busted their ass get in the game, even though they weren't that good.
yeah, yeah,
And he would focus if a really good player got out of hand or did something that required discipline, he'd keep him out of the game. He
yeah.
didn't he would do things like that because he was developing character. He wasn't developing football players.
Yeah, that's
So
something I wanted to mention. When I started the alumni group, it wasn't just me. It was a group of us, but the two guys that really made the difference. Remember that year before, that's right, because Jack, Don, Andy, and Bill was a year older. This was kind of the original group that started the alumni group. They had won the NCS championship. They won the biggest game you can win, right? All the way to like it's like a Northern California championship. But those two guys were. Andy was an attorney, so he had a law firm. Bill was partner in one of the largest construction companies in San Francisco. And those guys were just like me. They'd done very well. A lot of their success came from learning how to win, learning
yep.
how to compete.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't just me. It was us, and then pulling the resources. What I found is people like to help other people that have something in common with. And there's very few people that say they can walk in your shoes. And when you get into a sport like football, you could say you've been in their cleats. They put on the same color. They put on the same helmet. That there's a lot of commonalities. And I believe that the change has to come from within, but it also, if you're going to ask somebody to buy into something, they can relate to it, right? They know the impact that it's had on them. And that, yeah, and that's just kind of carried on all the way through, even though, those have changed. But you just, I think if we really want to have, here's the other thing I want to touch on a little bit. And the world's very divided right now, right? And I believe that, not to talk about, let's just say groups at this time wouldn't be, it's worthy of saying that we don't have to talk about the color of our skin or the color of our hair. That's not even, we don't need to talk about that in these events. We're one of the same. That's what sports does. That's what this country does for those that have something in common. And this is what it really bothers me, that we're so divided. And I'm 100% convinced that politicians and the media does that intentionally to separate us. And so what
well,
I
you're
think,
talking, as the whole time you're talking about this, and what a wonderful story. I mean, your life story, and then the whole 15 years of work towards, making the world a better place for these particular high school kids and everyone that's around them and their families, and how that just resonates out when you create a good man, how that resonates out to all these other people that are connected to that good man.
yeah.
And the way that men are being emasculated today, I didn't hear any of that in your story. You guys were
I think
football
that's
players.
what, again, we're talking about gratitude, and I'm reflecting on it. It's been a couple of days. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of appreciation. I feel really good that that's just as they're, even my wife refers to them, as like our kids, right? Because, but there's not, and it was like that when I was in high school. Of course, we laugh about each other's nationalities or how we look, and there's differences, but you don't have to say, it's not. I'm getting emotional because I can't find the right words to describe it. I just don't get the rest of the country why everything has to be divided into groups. In my opinion, Hayward always has been the model for the rest of the country. If that's what you're trying to get, then knock it off. Knock it the fuck off. Stop.
Yeah.
dividing people and separating people. Let people just be and get to know one another as they are. And I get very upset when I see, and maybe it's just different parts of the country because I'm naive and growing up in the Bay Area. I don't know.
I think it is. I mean, I'm in Florida and we have, one of the more conservative governors in the country, and I'm glad that I live in Florida. But I think whatever we're seeing is probably mostly misrepresentative of what's actually going on. Sometimes
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I hope that's the case.
And sometimes it's worse. It certainly does depend on what part of the country you're in, because if your state is run by a Republican governor and your city's run by a Republican mayor, that's a very different look than if your state's run by a Democratic governor and your city's run by a Democratic mayor.
See, Mark, I don't think it should have anything to do with politics. I know it is politics.
Well, I'm not saying it should. I don't think it should have anything to do with politics, but it does. Politics has bled into things it doesn't belong in. It doesn't belong in medicine. It doesn't belong in school. It doesn't belong in sports. It doesn't belong in people's personal lives.
I hear what you're saying. You're making my point about the politicians.
Yes, I am.
They make it a part of that, and it doesn't.
Well, it's control. It's if you weaken
divide and conquer, right?
Divide and conquer. If you weaken people or you scare people, they're easier to control, right? And so what you're doing there is you're building strong men. And the people that want to control don't like what you're doing, right? But what we need is way more of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think the greatest impact that you start to see later is that as they grow older, they have interactions with people that don't look like them or don't live where they live, but they see them as people, both sides. I'll be the first to say I've benefited from this over the last 15 years more than they have. So I'm almost feel guilty in their selfishness of it. So it's not as if I'm not getting the better end of the deal on this, because I've also grown from it too. But I do know the impact that it's had is that you come to somebody's house, especially after that many years, and you become part of it, you don't feel any different. It's sincerity. You're sincere about how you feel and how you're treated. The color, all that stuff goes away. It just goes away.
Well, it's one of the beauties of team sports. It's one of the beauties of sports in general is because, it's the ultimate meritocracy. I don't care if I'm playing basketball and I'm one of the guys, the four other guys that I want are the best four guys available, right? I don't give a shit what they look like, right? Yeah. And I might not want a short guy unless he can knock down threes, right? And he's quick as shit, but I don't care about any of that. Like it takes that lens, those lenses just disappear. Yeah. And that's where I constantly bring this up, Jim, but that's where we start talking about this. I think to myself, that's where the hypocrisy is in places like it's not on the playing field of an NFL team. There's none of that, right? But when you start to get up into the owner's box and now there's money and contracts and stadiums and that starts to bleed into that area there. And that's why Roger Goodell let that shit happen for a long time, the kneeling and stuff, and the no national anthem stuff.
Oh yeah, that has been so dividing. All of those things.
It's terrible. It's just terrible. No, it sounds like I'd love to figure out what we can do with that video. So let me know when you have a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, and, I will. Like I said, I'd like to get it transcribed. And I love your idea about having the audio improved on it.
Maybe we should do that anyway, because you could give him back a high quality audio because he's going to want it too.
Yeah.
That'd be a nice gift to him.
That's a great idea. Great idea. I'm going to stop this.